One dinner, 12 men, and only 11 walked away. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing this community grow. Your comments make each mystery come alive. Now let's begin. You could tell the guy was troubled by the way he held his hat, tight, like he was worried it might bolt for the door before he finished talking. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee and the morning mail when Fritz buzzed from the front. "Mr. Goodwin," he said in that mild voice of his that could make a battlefield sound like a polite tea party. "There is a man here who insists his business is urgent. He will not give a name." "Describe him," I said. "He looks like he has slept in his suit, and the suit has not forgiven him." That was Fritz's way of saying the guy wasn't brownstone material. I told him to send the man to the office. Wolfe, naturally, was in the plant rooms communing with the orchids, which meant it was my turn to screen the human species. The visitor shuffled in like someone unsure of the floorboards. Medium height, dark eyes that had seen too much but hadn't decided what to do with it, and a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been so carefully neutral. The kind of neutrality that takes practice. He sat when I gestured, hat still in his lap, and looked around the office as if expecting a trap door. "You wanted to see Nero Wolfe," I said. "He's otherwise engaged. I'm Archie Goodwin. You can tell me what it's about." He hesitated, swallowed, then leaned forward. "It's about a dinner. I've had all kinds of openings in this office. Murders, embezzlements, blackmail, missing cats, but never one that began with a dinner." "Must have been quite a meal," I said. "It will be," he answered, "if it happens." That earned him my full attention. He told me his name was Carlo Rivetti, restaurant manager, formerly of Brooklyn, now working uptown for an exclusive client. His job, he said, was to arrange a private dinner, 12 guests, one night only. The client, a man whose name, according to Rivetti, doesn't belong in daylight conversation. I didn't need a road map to guess what kind of company that meant. He leaned closer. "But there's a problem. Someone's trying to make sure the dinner never happens. Or worse, make sure it's remembered for the wrong reasons." I asked him what kind of reasons. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Wolfe's empty chair like it might decide to speak. "I need Mr. Wolfe," he said finally. "Because if this dinner goes forward, somebody dies. Maybe me." That was when the greenhouse door opened and Nero Wolfe entered, wiping his hands on a linen cloth, wearing that look that says he'd been interrupted at the only worthwhile occupation known to man, talking to orchids. Archie Goodwin, narrator, internal monologue, sharp as ever. Here we go. Another morning ruined by humanity. Wolfe's eyes landed on Rivetti. "You are distressingly loud for a man with no appointment." Rivetti stood. "Mr. Wolfe, I'll pay what you ask. I'm being followed. I can't go to the police. They'd call it mafia business, but it's not. It's personal." Wolfe sighed like Atlas finding another rock on his back. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "kindly extract from this man a coherent account before my lunch is delayed. If he proves dull, eject him." Rivetti's voice broke in urgency. "It's not dull, sir. It's about loyalty and betrayal and food." Wolfe's eyes narrowed at that last word. Food was the one subject that could breach his fortress of indifference. "Explain," Wolfe said. "The dinner," Rivetti said, "is called The Last Supper, a private event prepared for a dying man who wants to forgive his enemies. But one of them doesn't want forgiveness. He wants blood." Wolfe stopped mid-motion, then lowered himself into his chair like a judge resuming court. "You have my attention, Mr. Rivetti," he said. "Proceed. But be precise. I detest vagueness and sentiment." And just like that, the brownstone was disturbed. Wolfe didn't say anything for a while. He sat there like a man waiting for the wind to stop so he could hear the leaves fall. His eyes were half closed, but I knew better than to think he wasn't working. That big head of his was turning over every word Rivetti had said, picking out the bones, leaving the meat. When Wolfe finally spoke, his tone was smooth but pointed enough to slice butter. "You used the word forgiveness, Mr. Rivetti. Explain what it means in this context, if you please." Rivetti hesitated, looking from Wolfe to me as if I might rescue him. "I didn't. I've seen men try to lie to Wolfe, and it's about as successful as selling sand in the Sahara." "It's literal," Rivetti said at last. "The dinner's being hosted by Marco Latanza." That name landed in the room like a quiet thunderclap. You didn't have to be in law enforcement to know it. Latanza was an old-school operator, retired, or so the papers said. He'd run one of the biggest Italian import chains in the city, but everyone knew his business wasn't all olive oil and cheese. Still, the man had been out of the headlines for 10 years. Too quiet, if you asked me. "I see," Wolfe murmured. "And what does this forgiveness entail?" Rivetti rubbed his palms together, nervous. "Mr. Latanza's been sick for months, terminal cancer. He wants to bring together his old circle. 5 men, some partners, some enemies. He says he wants to close the books. He asked me to arrange the meal. Private dining room, 12 seats, 7 guests, counting him. He insists it happen within the week." "And you fear," Wolfe said, "that one of the guests intends to use this sentimental reconciliation as an opportunity for homicide." Rivetti nodded. "Not fear, no." "Ah." Wolfe leaned back, tenting his fingers. "And what convinces you of that certainty?" "There have been messages," Rivetti said, lowering his voice. "Threats. Notes slipped under my apartment door. Cancel the supper, or you'll be served at it." That earned a raised eyebrow from Wolfe. A touch melodramatic. I couldn't resist. "Sounds like someone wants to skip dessert." Rivetti didn't laugh. His hands trembled just slightly, and that got my attention. The guy wasn't play-acting fear. He was marinating in it. "I went to Mr. Latanza," he continued. "He told me to ignore it. Said fear was for men who still had time to waste. But I can't. If something happens that night, it's my head on the platter. They'll blame me. Or worse, they'll use me to get to him." Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, meaning he was done listening to panic and ready for precision. "Archie, take down the particulars. Names, places, times." I pulled out my notebook. "Shoot." "Marco Latanza," Rivetti began. 67, lives in an estate on Long Island, near Oyster Bay. The dinner's scheduled there for this Friday. Guests include Enzo Marini, former partner, Aldo the knife, Ferranti, ex-enforcer turned businessman, Gianni Russo, a lawyer, Father Dominic Spano, priest and childhood friend, and a woman, Latanza's niece, Elena D'Amato. She's the one who insisted I come to you." "Curious," Wolfe said softly. "Why not the police?" "She doesn't trust them. Says there's someone inside who'd tip off the wrong people. I don't know what to believe anymore." Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, the way a cat does when it's pretending not to care about the mouse in front of it. "And you expect me to prevent this potential bloodletting?" "I expect you to find out who's behind the threats," Rivetti said. "Before Friday. I'll pay anything. Mr. Latanza's expecting me this afternoon to confirm the arrangements. If I show up empty-handed—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Wolfe let out a deep sigh, the kind that usually means my workload just doubled. "Bah, a vulgar premise. Revenge disguised as piety. However," he paused, eyes still closed. "A supper. Food as the theater of death. It's grotesque, and intriguing." That was Wolfe for "I'm in." "Very well, Mr. Rivetti. You will provide Mr. Goodwin with every detail of the dinner, the menu, the seating arrangement, the history of each guest, and any correspondence you have received. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you to this appointment with Mr. Latanza. He will observe, discreetly. I will remain here, where reason thrived." Rivetti exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath since 1945. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. You won't regret it. On the contrary, Wolfe said dryly, I fully expect to. After Ravetti left, Wolfe gestured for the beer Fritz had already set on the side table. He took a sip, then looked at me. Archie, I require an orchid report before lunch, and then you will proceed with our nervous visitor. Sure, I said, but mind telling me why you're taking this? The Mafia doesn't exactly ring the doorbell here every day. Wolfe's gaze drifted to the window, thoughtful. Because, Archie, when a man arranges a dinner titled The Last Supper among former criminals and priests, he invites not reconciliation, but revelation, and I intend to know which it is. I've seen that look before. It means the fat man's hooked and I'm the one getting reeled into the pond. By 2 o'clock, I was in Ravetti's beat-up Buick, heading toward Oyster Bay. The man drove like guilt was sitting in the passenger seat. The closer we got to the coast, the more his hands twitched on the wheel. Tell me, I said, what's your real connection to Latanza? You don't strike me as just the hired help. He hesitated, eyes locked on the road. My father worked for him, before he retired. I was 12 when Latanza paid for my schooling, said I was too smart to waste behind a bar. I owe him my life. Then why do you think someone wants him dead? Because he's trying to make peace, Ravetti said, and peace scares men who've built their fortunes on war. The mansion came into view like something out of an oil painting, ivy, marble, and too many windows to count. A guard at the gate gave Ravetti a nod that wasn't friendly. Inside, the place smelled of polish and expensive decay. In the main hall, we were greeted by a man whose suit fit like it had been sewn directly onto him. He had the kind of shoulders that could knock over a Buick and a face that could scare it off the road. Mr. Latanza's expecting you, he said, his voice somewhere between gravel and threat. We followed him through a corridor lined with portraits. Every face on those walls had the same Latanza nose, prominent, imperial, and slightly crooked, as if God had signed his work. Latanza himself was waiting in a wheelchair near a grand piano. He looked smaller than his legend, white hair slicked back, cheeks hollow, but the eyes still sharp enough to pin a fly. So, he said, studying me, you're the detective's man, the one who does the walking. That's me, I said. Archie Goodwin. I walk so he can think. He smiled faintly. A fair arrangement, thinking is heavy work. He gestured for me to sit. Carlo says someone wants to spoil my last meal. That's poetic, don't you think? Depends on what's being served, I said. Latanza chuckled, then coughed, the sound dry and hollow. Let them try. I've lived too long on borrowed time to fear who comes collecting, but my niece worries. So we humor her. You'll attend the dinner, Mr. Goodwin. As Carlo's assistant, watch the guests. See if you can tell which one would rather drink blood than wine. He turned his gaze to the wide windows overlooking the garden. A final supper, he said softly. Every man will bring his appetite and his secrets. When we left, I had the feeling that every shadow in that house had ears. The ocean wind outside was colder than it should have been. Back in the car, I called Wolfe from a payphone near the gate. Report, he said. Your dinner party's got enough tension to feed an army. Latanza's sick but sharp. 5 guests, all questionable. I'll get names and backgrounds tonight. Good. And Archie, do not underestimate sentiment. It often disguises itself as virtue while concealing the most vulgar motives. Got it, I said. Anything else? Yes. Tell Mr. Ravetti to keep his hat off my desk when he returns. I dislike grease spots. That was Wolfe's way of saying the game had begun. And as the sun bled out over the bay, I realized I was heading straight for a dinner where every course might be served with a side of betrayal. When I got back to the city that night, the air had the damp chill that makes you wish for central heating and a conscience without drafts. I parked the Buick near the brownstone and went inside. The smell of Fritz's veal ragout was drifting from the kitchen, and I didn't need a clock to tell me Wolfe was at dinner. I waited until the scrape of his chair announced he'd finished and went into the office. He was there, napkin folded neatly beside his plate, eyes closed, working through digestion like it was a higher branch of philosophy. "Well?" he said without opening his eyes. I gave him the report, start to finish. Rivetti's nerves, Latanza's frailty, the cast of upcoming diners, and the general atmosphere of polite menace. He listened without a word, the only motion the slow rise and fall of his chest. When I finished, he opened his eyes, which were brighter than they'd been all day. "A fascinating tableau," he said. "Age, illness, guilt, and survival seated at one table. It has the flavor of Roman tragedy, except the Romans lacked lawyers." "True," I said, "but they made up for it in poison." He ignored that. "You observed no immediate threat?" "None obvious. But there's something off about the staff. The bodyguard, for instance. Big man. Dead eyes. No name offered. And Latanza's niece, Elena, she wasn't there. He mentioned her, but she never appeared. Rivetti claims she's the one who pushed for us, yet she's invisible." Wolfe drummed his fingers lightly on the arm of his chair. "You will find her, of course." "Of course," I said. "But before I do, you might want to know Latanza expects me at the dinner itself. Friday night, 7 guests, private room, full tasting menu. He says he wants me to watch the guests." That made Wolfe's eyebrows rise. "He invites an unknown observer to an affair of presumed secrecy. That suggests arrogance or desperation. Possibly both. Or maybe he just wants someone to applaud when the fireworks start." Wolfe made a low sound, almost a growl. "Archie, I dislike vulgar metaphors. Fireworks are for celebrations, not assassinations. However, if he expects you to attend, then you will, under my direction." He leaned forward, his tone sharpening. "Tomorrow you will find this Elena D'Amato. Speak to her. If she truly prompted her uncle to seek my aid, she may have motives of her own. Meanwhile, I shall review what the papers have buried about these men. And Archie, exercise caution. When sentimentality and power dine together, one inevitably ends up on the plate." That was my dismissal, so I took it. The next morning, I started with the easy part. Latanza's name still carried weight in certain corners, and it didn't take long for my calls to yield a few details. The niece, Elena D'Amato, worked as a curator at the Metropolitan Museum, Italian Renaissance section. Smart, cultured, and, according to one source, too pretty for her own safety. She was listed at an address on the Upper East Side, not far from the park. When I got there, the doorman gave me the kind of look you save for magazine salesmen. I told him I was expected. That word usually buys a few seconds of hesitation. It worked. Elena D'Amato opened her door before I could knock twice. She was tall, dark-haired, eyes like black glass. Reflective, not revealing. She wore a grey suit that said professional and a faint scent that said expensive. "Miss D'Amato," I said. "Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe." Her reaction was immediate. A flicker of relief, then caution. "Mr. Goodwin, I wasn't sure he'd take the case." "He has. He's curious, which for him is equivalent to affection." She smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I owe you gratitude. Please come in." Her apartment was modern, tasteful, and too neat for comfort, the kind of order that either hides chaos or comes from a lifetime of controlling it. I took a seat while she poured coffee. "My uncle told me about you," she said. "He finds you amusing." "Most dying men do," I said. "It distracts them." That earned me a sharper look. She set down the coffee and clasped her hands. "I didn't bring you into this for amusement, Mr. Goodwin. My uncle believes he can make peace with the men he wronged. But some of them don't want peace. They want closure in a different sense. So you think one of them plans to finish him? She nodded slowly. Enzo Marini. He was my uncle's partner years ago. They split after a shipment went missing. Millions unaccounted for. My uncle swore it was stolen by customs officials, but Marini blamed him. They haven't spoken since. Now Marini's invited to this reconciliation. Anyone else holding grudges? Ferranti, she said quickly. He worked as my uncle's enforcer. He was arrested once, but never talked. When he got out, the family business had changed. He's bitter. Then there's Gianni Russo. Clever, smooth. He handled their legal affairs, but started working with rivals later. If anyone knows where the bodies are buried, it's him. And the priest? She hesitated. Father Dominic. He baptized me. He believes this dinner is a confession, but I think he's afraid of what it might reveal. I jotted notes while she talked. You seem pretty sure danger's coming. Any proof? She got up and walked to a side table. From a drawer, she took a small envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a card, cream-colored, no handwriting, just a printed phrase in bold black letters. Every Last Supper needs a Judas. Found it on my doorstep 3 nights ago, she said. No return, no signature. I burned the first one. This one I kept. Anyone else know about it? She shook her head. Only Carlo. I thought of the police, but Uncle forbade it. Said bringing them would make it worse. So I called you. I tucked the card in my pocket. You did right. Wolfe likes puzzles with biblical allusions. Then he'll like this one too much, she said softly. Because if he's right, one of them intends to kill, and my uncle will let it happen if it means dying on his own terms. I left her with a promise Wolfe would handle it. Outside, the sky was turning overcast, the kind that smells like rain and inevitability. I headed back to the brownstone where Wolfe was in his office surrounded by news clippings, his nose deep in a file folder. He looked up when I entered. Ah, Mr. Mato? Sharp as a knife, scared as a rabbit. She handed me this. I dropped the card on his desk. He examined it with one thick finger. Crude but efficient. Whoever composed this has a sense of theater. And you, Archie, what is your impression of her? She's smart, careful. But she's holding something back. My guess? She's not telling us the real reason she's afraid. Wolfe grunted. Naturally. Few women disclose truth when fear and family intertwine. I shall consider her omission as informative. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. You will attend the dinner as planned. Fritz will assist you in preparing a pretext for your presence, perhaps as sommelier or aide. Observe every guest. Pay special attention to gestures, glances, silences, particularly at the table. That's a lot of homework for one meal. Then chew slowly, he said, and closed his eyes again. The rest of the day went to logistics, confirming with Rivetti, arranging transport, and trying not to think about Judas cards. By Friday evening, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle. I arrived at the estate early, wearing the kind of tux that says, I belong, but don't care. The dining room was candlelit, long table gleaming, silver polished enough to reflect sins. Latanza sat at the head, his face pale but smiling. The guests trickled in, Marini, heavyset and sweating. Ferranti, eyes like dark knives. Russo, smooth as ever, and Father Dominic, who looked like a man attending both a mass and a funeral. Elena sat to her uncle's right, composed but tense. I was introduced as the assistant. No one asked what I assisted with. Dinner began with polite conversation, the kind that masks what people really want to say. Wolfe had told me to watch, not talk, so I watched, every fork movement, every sidelong glance. Halfway through the third course, the lights flickered. Just a second, but enough to turn every head. When they steadied again, I noticed 2 things. Ferranti's hand was under the table, and Elena's wineglass had moved, closer to her uncle's. I leaned slightly forward. Latanza lifted the glass, smiled, and drank. And in that moment I knew Wolfe had been right. This wasn't just dinner. It was a confession in progress. But I didn't yet know whose. Latanza set his wine glass down with a faint clink, the sound oddly sharp against the low murmur of conversation. No one else seemed to notice. I kept my face arranged in neutral interest while my brain started counting backward from 10, waiting for anything. Cough, wince, sudden collapse. But the old man merely dabbed his lips with his napkin and leaned back, smiling faintly as though the wine had reminded him of better vintages. It was a tense table, though you wouldn't have known it if you were just passing through. Every laugh had too much polish. Every word arrived half-beaten to death before leaving the speaker's mouth. Marini was doing most of the talking, his voice too loud, his hands too wide, gesturing with the confidence of a man who's been waiting 10 years for an audience. Ferranti watched him like a snake listens to a flute. Russo ate slowly, the kind of man who measures every bite and every silence. The priest, Father Dominic, sat still, his expression a blend of patience and guilt, as if he'd been invited to absolve them all and couldn't find the right prayer. Elena, meanwhile, was fading. Not visibly sick, just drained. Her hand trembled slightly when she lifted her fork. I made a mental note and turned my attention back to the host. Latanza was enjoying himself too much for a dying man surrounded by possible killers. After the 5th course, a veal involtina that would have made Fritz weep, Latanza raised a hand. "My friends," he said, "forgive the sentiment, but I must thank you for coming. It has been too long." They murmured their polite responses. Marini said something about loyalty lasting beyond quarrels. Ferranti grunted, and Russo smiled like a man signing a false confession. Latanza's gaze swept the table. "You know why I called you here. I've made mistakes. I've hurt men I once trusted. I thought money could fix anything. It cannot. So tonight, before I go, I offer forgiveness and expect none in return." It was a fine performance. I almost applauded. The priest murmured a Latin blessing, which earned him a few indulgent smiles. The candles flickered again, this time without the power hiccup. I noticed Rivetti near the serving station, face pale, eyes darting to the table like he was watching the fuse on a bomb. Then, just as dessert arrived, a chocolate torte that could have been a bribe to the Almighty, Latanza's hand jerked. His fork clattered. The conversation stopped like someone had pulled a plug. He coughed once, then again, more sharply. The priest half rose. Ferranti stood so fast his chair screeched. I moved before anyone else, circling to Latanza's side, but Wolfe's training was burned into me. Observe first, act later. The man's pupils were shrinking, his lips tinged faintly blue. Poison, not much doubt. Elena gasped. "Uncle!" I caught his shoulder as he sagged. He managed one word, hoarse but deliberate. "Wine!" Then his head slumped forward, and his body went limp. The room erupted. Marini was shouting for an ambulance, Ferranti accusing everyone within reach, the priest crossing himself so fast it looked like semaphore. Russo called for a doctor, his voice steady but too calm. I checked for a pulse. Faint, but still there. "Call 911, I snapped at Rivetti, who'd gone pale as a ghost. He bolted. I turned back to the table. "Nobody leaves. Police will want a statement." Ferranti slammed his fist against the wall. "You think I did this?" "I think whoever did it will have plenty of time to explain," I said. "Sit down." Elena was trembling, her face bloodless. She clutched the table for support. I didn't need to be Wolfe to notice that the poisoned wine glass was the same one that had been moved earlier, by her hand. The ambulance came fast, but the cops were faster. It was a small town. A potential murder at the Latanza estate was better than television. The paramedics carried the old man out alive, but barely. Tubes and wires where pride used to be. The guests were gathered in the drawing room, each trying to look innocent and failing in unique ways. The police questioned them in circles for an hour. I kept quiet, offered my statement, and made sure Rivetti didn't crack. When the detective, a square-jawed man named Pirelli, finally released us, it was near midnight. I drove back in silence with Rivetti slumped beside me. When I dropped him off, he gripped the door handle like it was a lifeline. "He won't make it," he said. "You saw him." "I saw him breathe," I said. "As long as he's breathing, there's a chance." He shook his head. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He wanted peace. "Yeah," I said. "But peace doesn't mix well with poison." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting. That meant he hadn't gone to bed, which in his book ranked just above fasting and self-denial. He looked up from the chessboard he wasn't playing. Report. Latanza collapsed, mid-dessert. Poison, likely in the wine. He's still alive, for now. Guests included all 5. Elena looked terrified. Rivetti's shaken but breathing. Police have them under wrap. I told them I was just a witness. Wolfe's brows lowered. Describe the sequence. I did. Every move, every glance, every shift of glass. Wolfe listened, silent as a stone idol. When I finished, he sat back. So, the glass was moved by Miss D'Amato, yet the victim drank from it voluntarily. Right. And the flickering lights? Twice. The first time early in the meal, the second just before he spoke about forgiveness. I thought it was coincidence. Maybe not. Perhaps not. A signal, perhaps, or a test. He rose, rare enough to make me blink, and went to the Globe bar. He poured beer, then faced me. "Archie, this is an exercise in irony. A man arranging a supper to settle accounts finds himself poisoned amid reconciliation. Whoever attempted this was confident. Too confident. Then we're thinking inside job. I'm thinking," he said, "that whoever moved that glass intended it to be noticed. The act was theatrical. Miss D'Amato may have been protecting her uncle or serving him. We must find out which." I started to speak, but the phone rang. I crossed the room and picked up. It was Pirelli, the detective. "Goodwin, your friend Latanza's out of surgery. Barely made it. Doctors say it was digitalis. Slow poison. Someone dosed his wine. You're on the witness list, so don't go anywhere." "Wasn't planning to," I said, then hung up and told Wolfe. He nodded. Digitalis, of course, easily accessible, difficult to trace, yet distinct in flavor. He would have noticed, unless it had been masked by something strong. "Chocolate torte," I said. "Precisely. And the flickering lights might have been timed to distract him. A clever little play." He began pacing, his voice calm but firm. "Archie, tomorrow you will visit the hospital. If he survives the night, he may be willing to speak. If not, the family and guests will believe the danger has passed and become careless." "Want me to poke them?" "Delicately. Their reactions will tell us more than their words." "Got it." He stopped by the window, looking out into the dark street. "One more thing. Bring Miss D'Amato here tomorrow evening. Alone. I wish to examine her version of events." That was Wolfe's polite way of saying interrogation. I went to bed around 2, but sleep wasn't much interested in me. When I finally drifted off, it was with the image of that dinner table burned into my mind. The candles, the glass, the faint smile on Latanza's lips just before the poison hit. The next morning, I was at the hospital by 9. Pirelli was there, scowling over paperwork. He waved me toward a nurse who led me into a quiet room. Latanza lay pale as parchment, eyes half open. When he saw me, he managed to whisper, "You, Goodwin." "Yeah," I said, leaning closer. "You're a lucky man." He gave a faint smile. "Not lucky, not yet." "Tell Wolfe, Judas wasn't at the table." Then he closed his eyes again. I stood there, Not sure if he meant it metaphorically or as a clue. With Latanza, both were possible. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without comment. Then he said, almost to himself, "Not at the table. Intriguing. Archie, find out who wasn't supposed to be there, and why." "Meaning?" "Meaning," he said, "that Judas has already left the supper, and we are about to find out what he took with him." Wolfe sat in his chair, the one that had probably molded itself around him over the years, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. When he was like that, I knew better than to interrupt. You could practically hear the gears in his brain grinding away under the surface, quiet but relentless. I stood by the desk, waiting for the moment when the silence would finally crack. It came after a full minute. "Archie," he said, "Latanza's statement. Judas wasn't at the table. What is your interpretation?" "Well," I said, "if we're talking biblical metaphors, Judas is the betrayer. So maybe he means the person who poisoned him wasn't one of the 6 sitting around his linen and silver. Could be someone else entirely. Maybe a servant, a staff member, or someone who got to the wine beforehand." "Possible," Wolfe murmured, "but too literal. Judas, in Scripture, dined at the table before departing to commit his betrayal. Therefore, if our Judas wasn't at the table, the implication may be that the betrayal occurred earlier, before the meal began. The poison was not administered during the dinner, but before." "That would fit," I said, "if the wine was already tampered with before it was poured. And if that's true, the person who poured it wasn't the killer. They were just the delivery system." "Precisely," Wolfe said, leaning forward slightly. "Now consider who had access to the wine before the supper began." I thought back. Rivetti. He was the one running the show, arranging the menu, tasting the dishes, coordinating the service. If someone wanted to slip something into the wine, they'd have to get it past him. Unless, of course, he's the one who put it there himself. Wolfe's mouth twitched. Not a smile, exactly. More like the prelude to one. A possibility, though I hesitate to accuse the man who brought us this business. Guilt and fear often masquerade as each other. Still, we shall not dismiss it. He leaned back again, eyes narrowing in thought. "And Miss D'Amato, her gesture with the glass. You said she moved it closer to her uncle's hand." "Yeah. At the time, I thought she was being considerate. Maybe she was making sure he drank from the right one. Or ensuring he drank from the wrong one." I sighed. "You're a joy to work for, you know that? You make every act of kindness sound like an assassination attempt." He ignored me, which was his way of saying I wasn't entirely wrong. "Bring her here," he said finally. "This evening, as arranged. I wish to test her version of events under scrutiny." By the time Elena D'Amato arrived that evening, the storm outside had turned the city into a watercolor. Streetlights smeared in puddles, thunder rumbling low and patient. Fritz ushered her in with his usual calm efficiency, and I caught the faint scent of rain and perfume as she stepped into the office. She looked paler than before, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Miss D'Amato," Wolfe greeted her, gesturing toward the red leather chair facing his desk. "Please sit. You have had, I imagine, a distressing 48 hours." She nodded silently. "The doctors say he may not recover. He's conscious but weak. I went to see him this morning, but he barely spoke." Wolfe inclined his head. "He spoke to Mr. Goodwin, however. Told him something peculiar, that Judas was not at the table. You understand the implication?" Her brow furrowed. "He said that? Judas?" "Yes," Wolfe said, watching her closely. "What do you think he meant?" I don't know. He's been talking in riddles lately, especially since he got sick. Maybe he meant one of the guests. Maybe someone he expected didn't come." Wolfe studied her in silence. It was the kind of silence that could squeeze the truth out of a stone. She looked from him to me, uncomfortable under the weight of it. "Miss D'Amato," he said finally, "your uncle's dinner was arranged under your direction. You sought my assistance, claiming fear for his safety. Yet you attended, knowing the risk. Why? She hesitated. Because he insisted. He said this would be his last night as the man people knew him to be. He wanted me there to witness it, to see him make peace. And yet, Wolfe said softly, he drank from a glass you had moved into position. That hit her like a slap. Her hands clenched in her lap. I wasn't thinking. He was shaking. You wished to steady his hand? Wolfe finished for her, his tone mild but merciless. An admirable gesture, if sincere, yet the result was catastrophic. You understand how this appears. Tears welled in her eyes, but she fought them down. You think I'd poison him? My own uncle. I think, Wolfe said, that you have not yet told us the entire story. I decided to step in before she cracked completely. Miss D'Amato, maybe start from the beginning. The first time you thought something was wrong, what happened? She took a shaky breath. It started 2 weeks ago. Uncle Marco got a message from someone claiming to be an old associate, Raimondo Costa. Said he wanted to pay respects before the end. Uncle laughed it off, said Costa had been dead for 10 years. But the next day, a crate of imported wines arrived at the estate. No sender's name. Expensive stuff, Amarone, Barolo. Uncle told Carlo to keep it for the dinner. Wolfe's eyes brightened. Indeed. And the bottle served to him. Was it from this crate? She nodded. Yes, one of the Barolos. That crate, Wolfe said slowly, is of more interest than all the guests combined. I said, you're thinking the poison was in the shipment itself? I am, Wolfe replied. Digitalis, properly administered, could be concealed in such a container. The flavor would blend. Our culprit may not have been present at all. Elena looked confused. But then who? Patience, Wolfe said. We will identify him. He turned to me. Archie, you will retrieve that crate tomorrow morning, every unopened bottle. Deliver them to Mr. Stebbins at the toxicology lab. I want confirmation. On it, I said. Wolfe's attention shifted back to Elena. Miss D'Amato, do you recall who signed for the delivery? She frowned. Carlo did. He signed everything. Good, then we will question him. She looked exhausted, her composure cracking at the edges. Please, Mr. Wolfe, if you find who did this, I don't care why. Just don't let it be someone from my family. My uncle's done terrible things, but he doesn't deserve to die that way. Wolfe's face softened slightly. Only slightly. Few men receive the deaths they deserve, Miss D'Amato. You may go. Mr. Goodwin will escort you out. When she left, I lingered by the door. You believe her? Wolfe reached for his beer. I believe she's frightened, and truthful about some things. But she omitted one detail she cannot conceal for long, which is that she knew about the shipment before her uncle did. I stared. You're guessing. Hardly, Wolfe said. She mentioned that the crate arrived the next day. Yet she also knew its contents, Amarone and Barolo, without having opened it. Someone told her, likely the sender, which means she has had contact with a man presumed dead. Costa, I said, the ghost with a taste for Italian red. Just so, Wolfe said. Tomorrow you will visit Mr. Rivetti. Ask him whether Costa's name has come up before. Then go to the warehouse listed on the shipping invoice, if one exists. I suspect this crate did not travel through official channels. He closed his eyes again, signaling that the audience was over. The next morning was bright and cold, the kind that sharpens every sound. I found Rivetti at his restaurant, hunched over a ledger like it owed him money. He looked up when I came in and went pale. Mr. Goodwin, he said, I heard the news. How is Mr. Latanza? Holding on, I said, but barely. I've got a few questions. That wine shipment, who handled it? He swallowed. I did. It came through a private distributor. Name on the invoice was Costa Imports. I assumed it was one of his old contacts. I checked the seal. It looked legitimate. You didn't think it odd that it came from a man who's supposed to be dead? He hesitated. I didn't know that until now. That hesitation was just a hair too long. I've played enough poker to know a bluff when I see one. Carlo, I said, you're lying. You knew exactly who Costa was. You also knew Latanza wouldn't turn down a gift from a ghost. His jaw tightened. You don't understand. I owed him. Costa. He saved my father once. When the shipment came, I didn't ask questions. And when the old man started dying, his eyes dropped. I prayed it wasn't the wine, but I knew it was. I left him with that confession, drove straight back to the brownstone and found Wolfe waiting, as if he'd known the answer already. Costa's not dead, I said. He's hiding somewhere and using Rivetti as his errand boy. Wolfe nodded, eyes gleaming. Then Judas, Archie, has revealed himself. The betrayer is not among the diners, but among the servants, and he has already poured the wine of vengeance. He leaned forward, voice low. Now, let us find where he drinks. When Wolfe said, let us find where he drinks, I knew two things. One, I'd be the one doing the finding, and two, the trail was about to get muddy. I'd already seen enough of Carlo Rivetti's face to know that guilt was dripping off him like sweat in a July subway. The trick was figuring out whether he'd been playing delivery boy for a ghost or if he'd decided to graduate to poisoner himself. By noon, I was back in the car, tracing the paper trail of Costa Imports. The invoice Rivetti had shown me listed a warehouse address in Red Hook, the kind of place where the air smells of salt, oil, and old secrets. The building was brick, 3 stories, with a faded sign reading Costa Brothers Importers, paint chipped, letters fading like the family it belonged to. The front office was locked, but I've never been one to let a small detail like that stop me. Inside, the place was half empty. Dust, crates, the lingering scent of cork and mildew. A single desk stood near the window, papers scattered like confetti. I picked through the drawers until I found what I was looking for, a shipping ledger. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago, to M. Latanza, Oyster Bay. Shipment number 478, Barolo Reserve. Handled by C. Rivetti. So far, so expected. But the line underneath gave me pause. Authorized by our Costa. Authorized. That meant the man wasn't as dead as the papers had claimed. I pulled out my phone and called Wolfe. He's alive, I said. Costa signed the shipping manifest. In his own name. Of course he did, Wolfe said, voice as smooth as butter and twice as smug. Only the living take pride in their signatures. You have confirmed my suspicion. Then maybe you can share that suspicion before I start writing the eulogy. You will not need one yet. Mr. Costa's death 10 years ago was likely convenient fiction, a disappearance, not a demise. His resurrection now is deliberate. He wishes to be noticed, but only by those who owe him. I looked around the warehouse. Then he's probably close. Too many fresh tracks here. Dust disturbed, locks polished. Someone's been using this place recently. Find where he is now, Wolfe said. The man is too cautious to reveal himself without reason. A dead man sending poisoned wine to an old associate suggests motive deeper than vengeance. There's a message here, Archie. Read it. I hung up and did just that. On the desk was a small photo frame, glass cracked, containing a yellowed picture of 3 men, Marco Latanza, Carlo Rivetti's father, and a third man I assumed was Costa. They looked younger, confident, the kind of men who believed they'd already bought the world. And maybe for a time, they had. There was also an envelope tucked behind the frame, unsealed and addressed in tight handwriting, to CR. I slid the letter out and read it. Carlo, the old man thinks I'm gone, and perhaps I am, at least in name. But debts don't die, and neither do men who collect them. You owe me a favor. Deliver the wine. Say nothing. Do not open the crate. It will settle everything between us. R.C. Well, that settled it. Costa hadn't just risen from the grave. He'd brought his own sense of poetic justice with him. I pocketed the letter, locked the door on my way out, and called Wolfe again. He picked up on the first ring. You were correct, I said. Costa sent the wine. Letter confirms it. He told Ravetti to deliver and stay quiet. No mention of poison, but it's implied. Indeed. Our Judas writes scripture in his own hand. What's the play now? Find Costa, Wolfe said. He will not be far. Men who hide behind ghosts prefer the comfort of nearby graves. Begin with the obvious. His known addresses, former businesses, family, and Archie. Do not inform the police yet. They would trample subtlety under their boots. That last part was typical Wolfe. He'd rather lose a bet than share credit. I didn't argue. I spent the rest of the afternoon shaking down the records Costa had left behind. His old townhouse in Bensonhurst had been sold years ago, but the deeds showed something interesting. Sold to an Elena D'Amato. That made my pulse tick a little faster. When I got there, the neighborhood was quiet, the kind of street where laundry lines double as gossip wires. The townhouse was small, shuttered, but not abandoned. Fresh footprints marked the front stoop, and the mailbox had yesterday's paper wedged in it. I rang the bell. No answer. I waited 30 seconds, then tried the knob. It turned. Inside, the place was clean but lived in, furniture dusted, a faint scent of cologne lingering. On the coffee table sat an open ledger, another of Costa's trademarks. A few banknotes lay beside it, along with a half-finished glass of wine. Someone had left in a hurry. I heard a creak upstairs. I froze, hand hovering over my holster. Another step. Slow, deliberate. I moved toward the stairs and caught a glimpse of a man at the landing, grey-haired, sharp-featured, the same face from the photo in the warehouse. Costa, I said. He didn't look surprised. So you're Wolfe's man. He said it calmly, like he'd been expecting me. Alive and well, I see, I said. That's bad news for a few people. He gave a faint smile. For Marco, certainly. But not for me. You poisoned him. I corrected an old mistake, he said. I gave him what he gave me, a slow death. 10 years ago, he tried to have me killed. I disappeared instead. Now he's finishing what he started. Only this time the poison is mine. You could have just stayed dead, I said. And deny justice its balance. No. Marco needed to taste what betrayal feels like. I made sure his own trusted man, Carlo, delivered it. A final irony. It was a neat confession, the kind Wolfe would appreciate. But I wasn't about to let him monologue forever. I took a step forward. You're coming with me. He shook his head. I don't think so. Before I could react, he tossed the contents of the wineglass into the fireplace. Flames hissed and flared blue, filling the air with the bitter scent of chemicals. I won't be caught, he said. Not alive. He turned toward the window, but I was faster. One shove and he stumbled, losing his balance just long enough for me to grab his arm and twist it behind his back. The man still had strength, but not enough. I cuffed him with a pair I'd kept since a bad night in Yonkers. Poetic justice postponed, I said. He laughed once, dry and bitter. You think arresting me changes anything? He's already dying. Maybe, I said, but Wolfe's not done yet. I dragged him downstairs, called the cops, and waited while he sat there, calm as a priest at a confessional. When the uniforms came, he went quietly, almost relieved. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with a glass of beer and the faintest trace of satisfaction on his face. You found him, he said. And brought him in, I said. He confessed. Said Latanza tried to kill him 10 years ago, so this was payback. Used Carlo as the middleman. Poisoned the wine himself. Of course, Wolfe said. A fitting symmetry. Revenge aged like fine Barolo, served cold and fatal. He's right about one thing, I said. Latanza's still dying. Even if Costa's locked up, it won't change that. Wolfe looked at me, eyes half closed. Perhaps not. But justice, Archie, is seldom about resurrection. It is about reckoning. And we have achieved that. I poured myself a drink. You know, you could almost sound sentimental if you tried harder. He smiled faintly. God forbid. The phone rang again, sharp against the silence. I answered. It was Detective Pirelli. Goodwin, he said. Latanza just regained full consciousness. Says he wants to make a statement. Asked for you and Wolfe by name. I hung up and looked at the big man. He raised an eyebrow. Ah. The dying man wishes to speak. Then perhaps, Archie, our supper is not quite over. I grabbed my coat and we left together. The night outside thick with rain and something else. Unfinished business. Hospitals have a way of making even survival look temporary. The corridors always smell faintly of antiseptic and fatigue, and the lighting could make an angel look guilty. When Wolfe and I arrived, Detective Pirelli was waiting outside the room, his tie loosened, his expression somewhere between suspicion and relief. Goodwin, he said. Your man's awake. He's weak, but lucid. Doctor says you've got 10 minutes, tops. Don't make him excited. Trust me, I said. He's not my type. Pirelli gave Wolfe a look that said he didn't know whether to respect him or arrest him. Wolfe ignored it and moved past us, his bulk gliding down the corridor like a slow-moving verdict. Inside, Marco Latanza lay propped up by pillows, his face pale, his eyes half buried in shadow, but alive and burning with a strange calm. The tubes and monitors looked out of place on him. He'd been a man used to controlling rooms, not being kept alive by them. Mr. Wolfe, he rasped, the voice rough but steady. I didn't think you'd come. Wolfe settled himself in the visitor's chair, which creaked in protest. I'm here because I dislike unfinished meals, Mr. Latanza. You wish to speak. The faintest curve of a smile ghosted over the old man's lips. You've found him, haven't you? Costa. Yes, Wolfe said. Alive and in custody. He confessed to sending the poisoned wine. A satisfying symmetry, if one believes in such things. Latanza closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. He didn't do it alone. That got both our attention. Explain, Wolfe said quietly. There was another, Latanza said. Someone closer. Someone who wanted me dead long before Costa returned. He just gave them the means. Who? I asked. Latanza turned his gaze toward me. I saw it, just before I drank. The glass. Elena moved it. That name hung in the air like a held breath. You believe your niece poisoned you? Wolfe asked. His tone was calm, but his eyes sharpened. No, Latanza said. Not directly. She wouldn't have dared. But she knew. She must have. Costa couldn't have reached me otherwise. Not through the family, not through Carlo, but through her. Yes, she had access to everything. Why would she want you dead? I asked. He gave a tired smile. Because I ruined her father. That piece of the puzzle dropped into place with a thud. Her father? Yanni D'Amato, he said. He worked for me, trusted me. I framed him, embezzlement. I needed someone to take the fall for a shipment that went missing. He went to prison, died there. She was a child then, but children don't forget. I saw it in her eyes every time she visited me. She was polite, grateful. But I could feel it, the waiting. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. And yet she remained close. She was all I had left, Latanza said. And I thought I was all she had. The machines next to his bed clicked rhythmically, a mechanical heartbeat keeping time with his confession. He looked smaller with every word, as if each truth cost him another piece of flesh. She knew about Costa, he said. I told her once, after too much wine, that if I could change one thing, it would be not ordering his death. She must have remembered. When he contacted her, she saw her chance. She told him where to send it. And I let it happen. Let it? Wolfe echoed. Latanza's breath hitched. I was tired. I knew what it meant. When I saw the label, I knew whose wine it was. I drank it anyway. Maybe I wanted to be forgiven. Maybe I wanted to be punished. I don't know which. He looked at Wolfe again. Tell her I forgive her. That's all. The line of Wolfe's mouth tightened, not in sympathy, but in something close to respect. Mr. Latanza, forgiveness is your prerogative. But justice, I fear, is mine. The old man's eyes fluttered once, twice, then stayed closed. The monitor hummed steadily. He wasn't gone yet, but he'd said everything that mattered. Wolfe rose, turned to me, and nodded toward the door. Outside, Pirelli straightened. Well, your victim's conscience is intact, Wolfe said, but I'm afraid his family's reputation is not. Have Miss D'Amato brought in for questioning. Pirelli blinked. The niece? She was the one who called for help. Precisely, Wolfe said. Guilt often dials its own confession. We drove back through the rain-slick streets, the city reflected in wet glass and broken neon. Wolfe sat beside me in silence, thinking. I've seen him solve cases before, but this was different. There was no victory in it, just inevitability. When we got back to the brownstone, Fritz was waiting with coffee. Wolfe didn't touch his beer, which was his way of acknowledging the gravity of the evening. He sank into his chair and gestured for me to sit. Archie, he said, call Miss D'Amato. Tell her I require her presence tomorrow at 11. Use a tone of courtesy, not suspicion. I prefer confessions uncoerced. Sure, I said. But what's the end game here? Costa's confessed. The old man all but absolved her. Absolution is not exoneration, Wolfe said. If she collaborated, she will admit it. If not, her denials will betray her. I must confirm whether she played Judas or merely lit the candles for the supper. The next morning, she came. Right on time. Dressed in black, face pale, movements careful, as if she were afraid of breaking something invisible. I showed her in, and Wolfe gave her one of his slow nods. Miss D'Amato, he said, your uncle lives, though he may not for long. He has asked me to tell you he forgives you. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears. She sank into the chair without speaking. I don't understand, she whispered. Forgives me for what? Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. For assisting Mr. Costa. She flinched, and that was all the answer he needed. But Wolfe wasn't one to stop at implication. He continued, voice level and cool. Your uncle's confession implicates you, but I prefer evidence to sentiment. You corresponded with Mr. Costa before the wine shipment arrived. Your address appears on property he once owned. You facilitated communication, likely believing you could control the outcome. Tell me, Miss D'Amato, when you realized Costa meant to kill him. Why did you do nothing? She stared at him, then at me, then back again. Her lip trembled, but she spoke clearly. Because I thought he deserved it. The words hit the air like the sound of a knife being drawn. You could have stopped it, I said quietly. I could have, she said. But I didn't. I told Costa where to send it. I didn't know about the poison, only that it would end things. I thought maybe it was blackmail, a threat. Not this. She shook her head, tears sliding freely now. And when I saw the bottle at dinner, I knew, and I said nothing. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his voice softened a fraction. That, Miss D'Amato, is the cruelest form of guilt, complicity wrapped in silence. You neither killed nor saved him. You merely watched. She covered her face with her hands. What happens now? Your fate, Wolfe said, depends on your uncle's. If he dies, you will stand trial for conspiracy. If he lives, perhaps mercy will accompany his forgiveness. She looked up, eyes red but steady. And you, Mr. Wolfe, what do you believe I deserve? Wolfe took a long breath, his gaze distant. I believe that every sin demands an audience, Miss D'Amato. Yours has had one. That is punishment enough, for now. She left soon after, escorted by Pirelli's men who had arrived at Wolfe's request. The house grew quiet again, save for the faint ticking of the wall clock. I leaned against the desk. You could have handed her over last night. I could have, Wolfe said. But truth, Archie, requires timing. Last night she would have denied everything. This morning she confessed to herself first. That is the only confession worth hearing. He reached for his beer then, finally, and took a slow sip. Costa will face the law, he said. Miss D'Amato will face her conscience. Mr. Latanza will face whatever waits for men who believe redemption is a dish best served poisoned. The circle is complete. I nodded. And us? He sighed, leaning back. Dinner, Archie. Fritz has prepared osso buco. A man must eat after witnessing such gluttony of the soul. And that was Wolfe for you. Justice, morality, human tragedy, all distilled into the same conclusion. Eat well, think better, and never forget that appetite, whether for food, power, or forgiveness, always ends at the table. By the time the front door closed behind Elena D'Amato and Pirelli's men, the brownstone was as still as a church after confession. Wolfe sat motionless, a statue with thought behind its eyes, while I poured 2 fingers of rye and tried to chase the ghost of the evening out of my head. The clock ticked softly, the kind of sound that fills up the space after the truth's been said. Archie, Wolfe murmured finally, his voice thick with thought. Forgiveness is a treacherous luxury. It pretends to cleanse, but often merely conceals. That's poetic, I said, but the cops aren't much for poetry. Pirelli's probably filing charges already. She as good as confessed. Confession is not guilt, Wolfe said sharply, nor is guilt always criminal. She did not poison him, Archie. She facilitated a consequence, which is about as comforting as saying a man didn't pull the trigger, he just handed over the loaded gun. He frowned, which meant I'd scored a point, but shouldn't gloat. The law will decide her portion of culpability. Our concern is whether we have seen the whole board. I dislike boards with missing pieces. I sank into my chair. Costa's locked up. Elena's on ice. Latanza's circling the drain. What more could be missing? The motive's final contour, Wolfe said, eyes half-lidded. Revenge and guilt suffice for narrative, but not for truth. Men rarely risk exposure for sentiment alone. Costa said he wanted balance. The old man tried to have him killed 10 years ago. Sounds like balance to me. Too simple, Wolfe said. Costa's reappearance served a dual purpose, vengeance and revelation. He intended not only to kill Latanza, but to expose something. The poison was not the end. It was the punctuation mark. I knew that tone. It meant the fat man's brain had gotten ahead of his mouth, and the rest of us were supposed to catch up. Expose what? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the phone and dialed the hospital. He waited, eyes narrowing, while the line clicked through. Dr. Myers, if you please, he said. Yes, this is Nero Wolfe. I wish to inquire about the condition of your patient, Marco Latanza. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but I could see Wolfe's expression flatten, then tighten. He hung up carefully. Latanza is dead, he said. The words dropped like a manhole cover. When? I asked. Half an hour, ago. Cardiac arrest. Poison finished the job. Wolfe shook his head. No, the doctor believes he was recovering. His death was sudden. I put my glass down. Sudden's a word with bad manners. You thinking what I'm thinking? Most likely, Wolfe said, that someone decided justice should not wait for the courts. I grabbed my hat. Then I'll go find out who. Not yet, Wolfe said, raising a hand. We proceed methodically. The hospital will be chaotic. The police will blunder through it like bulls in pastry. We shall wait until morning. Wait, I said, while somebody out there's making sure loose ends stay tied. He fixed me with that look that makes you feel like an ant arguing with a microscope. You will wait, Mr. Goodwin. I will think. And that was that. I didn't sleep much. Around dawn, the city woke up like it always does. Tired, late, and unimpressed. By 8, Wolfe had Fritz bring us breakfast, and by 9, I was back on my way to the hospital. The nurse at the front desk recognized me from the night before and led me to the private wing. Pirelli was already there, jaw tight, chewing on a pencil like it owed him rent. Goodwin, he said, your employer sure knows how to pick them. The old man's dead, the niece is in custody, and I've got 2 staff members missing, 1 orderly, 1 nurse. The nurse signed out early. The orderly didn't sign out at all. Names? I asked. Orderly's a guy named Matteo Russo. The nurse, Lucia Ferranti. That name hit like a jab. Ferranti, as in Aldo Ferranti's daughter. Yeah, you know her? I know her father was one of the guests at the Last Supper. Big man, short fuse. Pirelli grunted. You think he's connected? I think Wolfe will want to know both of them vanished right after a man who wasn't supposed to die did. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was on his 2nd bottle of beer and 4th layer of deduction. I gave him the rundown. He listened without interruption, eyes narrowing at the mention of Lucia Ferranti. Interesting, he said. The father, Aldo, was once Latanza's enforcer. His daughter now tends to his old employer's bedside. Poetic symmetry again. But coincidences bore me, Archie. There's more. She could have just panicked, I said. Nurses vanish after patient deaths all the time. She could have, Wolfe agreed, but she did not. She acted. He gestured to the phone. Call Saul Panzer. Have him find where Lucia Ferranti went after leaving the hospital. If Aldo is involved, we must intercept before he does something irrevocable. When Wolfe says something irrevocable, he means something messy. I called Saul, gave him the details, and less than 3 hours later he called back with his trademark understatement. She bought a train ticket, Saul said. Albany line, departed at 9:30. The name on the ticket was Lucia Ferranti, but the description on the manifest says male, mid-40s. Guess who? Aldo, I said. Bingo. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. He's running. Probably with her. Running or concluding the affair, Wolfe said. Revenge breeds redundancy. Costa's imprisoned, Latanza's dead, and Aldo Ferranti must now decide whether his loyalty lies with his blood or his past. I'll take that as a hint to catch the train. He sighed. Yes, though I detest chasing trains. Retrieve them, Archie. Bring both back if you can. I prefer my truths intact. By the time I reached Penn Station, the Albany line had already pulled out, but I caught the next express and spent 2 hours staring at rain against glass. When we arrived, I went straight to the station's records office. Saul's lead had been solid. Lucia and Aldo had rented a room at a small boarding house near the river. I found it easily enough. The place smelled like cheap cigars and disinfectant. The clerk didn't ask questions. I've got that kind of face. Room 12 was at the end of the hall. I knocked once, twice. Lucia opened the door. She looked frightened but composed. Behind her, Aldo Ferranti sat by the window, staring out at the water. His face was gray, his shoulders sagging. He turned slowly when he saw me. Mr. Goodwin, he said, I figured Wolfe would send you. Smart man, I said. You want to tell me why your daughter's a nurse and you're suddenly her patient? He smiled faintly. I came to protect her, not to run. From what? From the truth, he said. She didn't know what Costa planned. She thought it was a warning, same as Elena. When Latanza didn't die right away, Costa sent word. Said there'd be no peace until the debt was paid in full. Lucia found out. She went to the hospital this morning to finish it. She couldn't let Costa think she'd failed. I stared at him. She killed him. She gave him a dose. Small, quick. Said it would stop his pain. And maybe it did. I told her to run, but she's my daughter. I couldn't let her go alone. Lucia's eyes filled. He was suffering. He was already dying. I just made it quicker. I sighed. That's not how the law's going to see it. She shook her head. I don't care. I couldn't stand to see him suffer. I radioed Pirelli from the front office. He arrived an hour later and took them both without handcuffs. Aldo went quietly. Lucia cried once, then stopped. Some crimes have already been punished by the time the law gets there. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting, of course, and he listened while I told him everything. When I finished, he nodded slowly. Ah, he said, so the supper ends not with betrayal, but with mercy. Imperfect, misguided mercy. That's one word for it, I said. Another might be tragedy. Tragedy, Wolfe said, is merely logic that has run out of alternatives. Every man in this affair pursued balance, and in doing so destroyed it. Costa sought justice, Latanza sought redemption, Elena sought release, and Lucia sought peace. Each achieved precisely the opposite. He leaned back, ears closing, voice softening. It is the eternal banquet of humanity, Archie. We feast upon our own guilt. Sure, I said, but guilt doesn't pair well with Fritz's osso buco. Wolfe's eyes opened, and that rare glimmer of humor sparked. On the contrary, my dear Archie, it is guilt that sharpens the appetite. And that was how it ended. Not with a verdict, but with a lesson, quiet and heavy as the night itself. Outside, the city went on pretending it was innocent, and inside, Wolfe reached for his burr, the final ritual of a man who understood that truth, like any fine meal, was meant to be consumed slowly, savored, and never entirely finished. The rain that night was slow and steady, the kind that wraps around the city like a whisper you can't shake. The brownstone felt heavier than usual, too much truth in the air, and Wolfe didn't like the smell of it. He was in his chair, surrounded by the quiet authority of his orchids and the faint clink of Fritz in the kitchen. Setting up dinner, neither of us had much appetite for. The case was finished, at least by the police's definition. The papers would call it the Last Supper murders, or something equally inspired. And that would be the end of it for everyone except the ones who still had to live with what they'd done. I sat opposite Wolfe, nursing a drink. The light from the lamp hit his face in soft yellow and shadowed the rest, like the world couldn't quite decide whether he was part of it or not. For a while, neither of us spoke. He had his beer, I had my rye, and silence was the third member of the conversation. Finally, I said, "You know, I'm starting to think your line of work could use fewer meals and more happy endings." He looked at me, one eyebrow rising just slightly. The world, Archie, is not designed for happy endings. It is designed for continuations. That is why we endure. "Sure," I said, "but if we're going to endure, I'd at least like dessert." That earned a faint grunt, Wolfe's version of laughter. "Fritz has prepared zabaglione," he said, "so it would be an insult to justice to let it go to waste." I didn't argue. When Fritz brought it in, the smell alone almost made me forget that we'd spent the last week swimming in betrayal. Wolfe took a spoonful, savored it like it might confess something profound, then set it down. "Archie," he said, "do you believe Miss D'Amato will sleep tonight?" "Not likely," I said. "But then again, she's got company. Between her conscience and the district attorney, she won't be lonely." "Ah," Wolfe murmured. "Yes, Conscience is the truest jailer. Bars rust, but guilt is eternal. He leaned back, the kind of motion that usually precedes philosophy. Observe the symmetry, Archie. Every participant acted from loyalty, misguided but pure in its own perverse fashion. Costa to vengeance, Latanza to repentance, Ferranti to protection, the women to mercy. Each sought to preserve something dear, honor, family, peace, and in doing so destroyed it. It is almost ecclesiastical. You're telling me the whole mess was a sermon. In its way, he said. Every man builds his altar, some to power, some to forgiveness. The tragedy is that they cannot tell which God they're serving until it's too late. He fell silent again, and I let the quiet stretch. I knew he wasn't done. When Wolfe's mind was working, you could almost hear it shifting. Slow, deliberate, precise. After a while, I said, "Something's still bothering you." His eyes flicked open, sharp again. "A trifle. The poison." I frowned. "Digitalis." Costa admitted it. "Yes," Wolfe said, "and yet the means of its delivery remains uncertain. Costa claimed he added it to the wine which reached the estate sealed. But how was it preserved so long without detection? Digitalis degrades quickly in alcohol. It would have lost potency in a matter of weeks." I set my glass down. "So you're saying the poison wasn't in the wine at all?" "I'm saying it may not have been," Wolfe replied. "It is possible that Costa intended only to frighten Latanza, to send a symbolic gesture rather than a fatal one. The true act of poisoning may have occurred later, during the dinner itself." "By who?" "Helena didn't touch the wine except to move the glass." "Precisely," he said. "And what was she moving it from?" That stopped me cold. I replayed the image in my head. The flicker of candlelight, the sudden movement, her hand sliding the glass closer to her uncle. My gut tightened. "You think she was switching them?" Wolfe nodded once. "She may have realized the danger too late. If her glass, not his, was the one poisoned, she might have been saving herself." I let that sink in. That'd mean Costa sent it for her? "Or for both," Wolfe said softly. "Perhaps he believed vengeance was incomplete without punishing the bloodline that betrayed him." "But that doesn't make sense," I said. "She helped him. She made it possible." "Indeed," Wolfe replied. "And yet betrayal breeds paranoia. A man capable of deception assumes it in others. Costa may have thought she would turn on him or reveal his survival. In which case, the gesture of forgiveness would be the perfect disguise for retribution." I whistled under my breath. "So the whole dinner was a trap inside a trap." "As are most meals," Wolfe said dryly. The phone rang then, sharp against the soft drone of the rain. I answered. It was Pirelli. "Goodwin," he said, his voice clipped. "We've got a development. Costa's dead." I stiffened. "What?" "Found in his cell an hour ago. Cyanide. No note." "Cyanide," I repeated. "Yeah, quick, clean, theatrical. The kind of ending that suits him, I guess. Thought you should know." I hung up and turned back to Wolfe. "Costa's out. Took the easy way." Wolfe didn't react. Not right away. Then he said, "How convenient." "You don't sound convinced." "Convenience, Archie, is the enemy of truth. A man who has spent 10 years hiding, who returns to exact vengeance through elaborate symbolism, does not choose simplicity for his exit. No, someone chose it for him." "You mean he was silenced?" "I mean," Wolfe said, "that the supper's final course has yet to be served." The line of his mouth hardened. "Call Pirelli. Tell him to examine Costa's cell. The poison was not smuggled in, it was administered." "By who? He was in custody." "Precisely, which narrows the possibilities." While I called Pirelli back, Wolfe was already deep in thought. When I hung up, he asked, "Where is Miss D'Amato being held?" "At the precinct. Pirelli said she's under observation until arraignment." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. Send for her, quietly, before they make it official. Tell Pirelli I require her presence for clarification on an evidentiary point. He'll agree. He knows better than to interfere with clarity. An hour later, she was back in our office. Paler, thinner, but not broken. The dark circles under her eyes had deepened, but the defiance was gone. She sat where she had before, and Wolfe regarded her like a surgeon measuring distance before a cut. "Miss D'Amato," he began, "you have heard that Mr. Costa is dead?" Her eyes flickered. "Yes, the police told me." "He died by poison," Wolfe said. "Cyanide, administered in custody. An impossible feat for a man already stripped of agency. Do you find that curious?" She hesitated. "I suppose. But I don't know anything about it." Wolfe tilted his head. "Curious indeed. You were seen at the hospital the morning your uncle died. You were also at the precinct earlier today, delivering a statement. 2 men are dead, and both within hours of your proximity. Should I find that coincidental?" Her voice cracked. "You can't think I do not think," Wolfe said. "I deduce. Costa was poisoned, and you had opportunity. You feared he would reveal your role in his scheme. You silenced him." Tears welled, but she didn't look away. "You don't understand. He would have destroyed everything. He said if I didn't help him escape the charges, he'd tell the world the truth, that I'd known about the poison from the beginning. I couldn't let that happen. I brought him food during questioning. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him quiet." "Then justice is complete," Wolfe said, his tone neither cruel nor kind. "Every conspirator has now fulfilled their role. Each has taken what they thought they could live with, and each has been wrong." She wept silently. Wolfe didn't move. I stood there, hating the sound but knowing better than to stop it. When Pirelli arrived to take her back, Wolfe dismissed him with a nod, and when the door finally closed again, he leaned back and let out a long breath. "There, Archie," he said, "lies the perfect symmetry of guilt. No man or woman escapes the feast. Each takes their portion until the table is empty." I poured us both a drink. "And what's left?" I asked. He stared at the rain against the window. "Silence," he said, "the palate cleanser of truth." He lifted his glass, took a measured sip, and added, "Now, Archie, if you please, call Fritz. I find I'm suddenly very hungry." And that was the end of it. The Last Supper was over. But in Nero Wolfe's brownstone, the table never really clears. It just waits for the next guest to disturb the peace. When a case ends, it doesn't really end. It fades, like smoke from a good cigar, or the aftertaste of something bitter you shouldn't have swallowed. The papers were already calling it the Mafia's Last Supper, though Wolfe growled that such phrasing was a barbaric trivialization. For once, I agreed. Nothing about what had happened was neat enough for headlines. By the following afternoon, the brownstone was back to its usual rhythm, quiet, ordered, smelling faintly of orchids and coffee. Fritz moved about the kitchen with his usual precision, and I sat in the office pretending to sort mail but mostly replaying everything that had happened. Costa, Latanza, Elena, Lucia, they'd all fallen in line like dominoes Wolfe had merely pointed at. No fanfare, no fireworks, just slow, inevitable collapse. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, reading a rare volume on Roman feasts, as though the past week had been an academic exercise. He'd eaten a light lunch, trout, lemon, and a bottle of Mosel, and seemed satisfied that justice, however poisonous, had been served. I said, "You realize, of course, that the police are taking credit for this one." He looked up briefly. "The police may have the body, Archie. I have the truth. I consider that a satisfactory division of spoils." "Sure," I said, "but Pirelli's already told the reporters you assisted informally." He used that word twice. It's like saying you showed up to hold the flashlight. "I have never needed to hold a flashlight," Wolfe said. I see perfectly well in the dark. I grinned. You mean the moral dark or the criminal kind? Both, he said dryly. They differ less than you imagine. He took a sip of beer, then leaned back, letting out a small sigh. Tell me, Archie, how do you perceive Miss D'Amato now? Honestly, I said, like a woman who didn't mean to end up in hell but kept walking anyway. She didn't poison anyone with her hands, but she lit every candle on the table. An apt description, Wolfe said. Her crime was omission, a failure of conscience, not of cunning. Such sins are the most insidious. They often masquerade as mercy. He paused, then added, She will serve a sentence, of course. But her punishment began long before she crossed my threshold. I poured myself a drink and sat down opposite him. What about Lucia Ferranti? She's claiming she acted out of pity. Pity, Wolfe said, is the cousin of arrogance. It presumes to know what others deserve. She ended a life to spare her own discomfort. Whether she called it compassion is irrelevant. The act was hubris, not humanity. He fell silent again, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room. The rain had started up outside, tapping against the window panes like a metronome keeping time for his thoughts. I'd seen that look before, the slow, inward turn of his mind when a case's final shape revealed itself to him, not as a puzzle, but as a pattern. You know, I said, if you hadn't taken this one, you'd still be up there talking to orchids, and I'd still be wondering what to do with my mornings. So what made you say yes? It wasn't the money. No, he admitted. It was the setting. A dinner titled The Last Supper. He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. To disturb the sanctity of food for such vulgar theatrics offended me. One does not weaponize a meal. Guess they missed that memo, I said. He inclined his head slightly. They did, and they paid the appropriate tithe to ignorance. We let the silence stretch again. Fritz came in quietly, collecting the empty dishes, and Wolfe thanked him with a small nod. For a man who disliked human intrusion, he had a peculiar reverence for the few people who made his world tolerable. After Fritz left, Wolfe set his glass down. Archie, what do you think they all wanted in the end? Peace, I said. Every one of them, even Costa. He wanted balance. The old man wanted absolution. The women wanted relief. They all wanted peace. Just couldn't tell it apart from escape. Ah, Wolfe murmured. Peace and escape, the eternal confusion. To flee one's conscience is not tranquility, it is merely motion. Tell that to the rest of us, I said. We spend half our lives trying to dodge regret. You just sit here and reason it out. He smiled faintly. And yet, Archie, I suspect you sleep better than most of them. Some nights, I said. The others, I pour whiskey. He chuckled quietly. Rare, deep, and genuine. A barbaric but effective ritual. The doorbell rang then. Wolfe groaned. Confound it. If that is another journalist, I shall have you remove him bodily. I went to the door, and to my surprise, it wasn't a journalist. It was Detective Pirelli, hat in hand, expression neutral but eyes sharp. Goodwin, he said. Mind if I come in? Depends, I said. You bringing trouble, or just conversation? Little of both. I let him in. Wolfe gave him a curt nod but didn't rise. Mr. Wolfe, Pirelli said, thought you'd want to know. The D'Amato girls agreed to testify. Against Costa's associates, the ones who helped fake his death 10 years ago. Looks like this goes deeper than we thought. Wolfe arched an eyebrow. So the roots reach further underground. How very unsurprising. Pirelli smiled thinly. Well, I thought maybe you'd like to know your little supper set off a clean sweep. Half a dozen indictments already. Wolfe inclined his head. Then civilization has been served its first course of justice. Whether it digests it properly is another matter. Pirelli looked at me like he wasn't sure if that was sarcasm or philosophy. Anyway, figured you'd want closure. Wolfe made a dismissive gesture. Closure is an illusion, Inspector. There's only cessation of immediate disturbance. Good day. Pirelli blinked, then chuckled softly. You really are something, Wolfe. Yes, Wolfe said simply. I am. After he left, I shut the door and turned back. You know, one of these days your humility's gonna choke you. Bah, Wolfe said. Humility is for men uncertain of their competence. I'm not. He reached for his beer, drained it, and let out a contented sigh. Now, Archie, please see that Fritz serves dinner precisely at 7. I find I'm in the mood for civility after so much barbarism. What's on the menu? I asked. Risotto alla Milanese, he said. Properly prepared. Gold in color, unlike the motives we've recently endured. That was Wolfe, never missing a chance to tie gastronomy to morality. As the evening settled, I poured another drink and watched him sink into his chair again, eyes half shut, the faint smile of a man who'd once more wrestled chaos into order. Outside, the rain thinned to a mist, the city lights shimmering through it like the afterimage of a dream. Wolfe said quietly, almost to himself, Archie, do you know why truth is so often unpalatable? Because it ruins the appetite. Because it requires digestion, he said, and most men prefer swallowing to thinking. He closed his eyes, signaling the conversation was over. Fritz's voice called from the kitchen, announcing dinner, and I stood, stretching. Well, I said, the world's gone back to its usual madness, and we've got risotto. I'll take that as a win. Indeed, Wolfe murmured, eyes still closed. The world is madness, Archie. Our only duty is to season it properly. I couldn't argue with that. I turned off the lamp, letting the shadows reclaim the room. Outside, the storm had spent itself, and for a moment, even the city seemed to hold its breath. And just like that, the brownstone was at peace again until the next knock on the door, the next trembling voice, the next story that would stain another supper. Because with Nero Wolfe, peace was never permanent. It was simply the pause between courses, 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 pause between courses,